Well, good morning to you. I mean, it's great to be back. Linda and I have been on a couple of weeks of annual leave. We normally go to Spain this time of year, but this year we've chosen to go to the Costa del Teesside. So this is the cheapest tan I've had for a good number of years. Also this morning I'm doing a little bit of modelling for my daughter's business, MHK, Making Him Known, found on Etsy and Instagram and Facebook. So I'm modelling this t-shirt here for her this morning. So Eat Your Heart Out, Joe Winterschladen, who's our resident Tees Valley Community Church model. Hannah chose me to model this over you. Anyway, on a more serious note, we are continuing this morning our series entitled Stories for All Seasons, God's Wisdom for Life through the Parables of Jesus. Can I commend to you the Dig Down Deep video on our YouTube channel that Mike has done as an introduction to the parables. It's a fantastic investment. 20 minutes will give you great context and background for Jesus' teaching on parables and what he was looking to do through that teaching. So the last three weeks we've looked at the parable of the sower, the unforgiving debtor, and then last week the 10 bridesmaids. This morning's title is The Servants, and we're going to look at Matthew 25, the parable of the talents. Can I encourage you, if you haven't done so already, just to press that share button so that other people can engage in what God's going to be doing this morning. So let's read Matthew 25. I'm going to read a bit of verse 1 and then jump down to 14 to 30. At that time, the kingdom of heaven will be like, verse 14, a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his wealth to them. To one he gave 5 bags of gold, to another 2 bags, and to another 1 bag, each according to his ability. Then he went on his journey. And the man who'd received 5 bags of gold went at once and put his money to work and gained 5 bags more. So also the one with 2 bags of gold gained 2 more. But the man who'd received 1 bag went off, dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts with them. The man who'd received 5 bags of gold brought the other 5. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 5 bags of gold. See, I've gained 5 more. And his master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. The man with the 2 bags of gold also came. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 2 bags of gold. See, I've gained 2 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful with a few things. I'll put you in charge of many things. Come and share in your master's happiness. And then the man who'd received 1 bag of gold came. Master, he said, I knew you were a hard man, harvesting where you've not sown and gathering where you've not scattered seed. So I was afraid, and I went out and I hid your gold in the ground. See, here's what belongs to you. His master replied, you wicked, lazy servant. So you knew that I harvest where I've not sown and gather where I've not scattered seed. Well, then you should have put my money on deposit with the bankers, so that when I returned, I would have received it back with interest. So take the bag of gold from him and give it to the one who has 10 bags. For whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them. And throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Well, this parable is simply about how we use what we have to serve God. The amazing benefits of doing that faithfully, and the significant drawbacks of letting that opportunity pass us by. If we're looking for wisdom for life, this is a parable about wise investment within life. So I'd like to talk to you this morning about 3 things that we need to recognize if we're to be the servants of God who make wise investment choices. So the first thing that we need to recognize is we need to recognize our source of investment. Did you know there are 3 types of gold used by jewelers? Yellow gold, white gold, and you might not know this, rose gold. I want to suggest to you that every single individual has the 3 distinct types of gold in their lives. The first one is called your time. And for illustrative purposes of this sermon, we're going to call that our yellow gold. The second is our finances and material possessions. And again, for illustrative purposes, let's call that our white gold. And then thirdly, we have our abilities, the things that we're capable of doing, which we will call our rose gold. Now, every single person is in possession of yellow, white and rose gold in bags within their lives. Now, just like in the parable, we don't all have equal amounts. Depending on who we are, your circumstances, your responsibilities, your season in life, we will all have different amounts of each. You know, someone who's retired with no direct family responsibilities might be in a season where they've got 10 bags of yellow gold, that is time. Whereas some others with busy demanding jobs and young families may have only 2 bags of yellow gold. Some with busy demanding jobs might also be very, very well paid for those jobs. So they might have only 2 bags of yellow gold, time, but they might have 5 bags of white gold, that is finances and material possessions. We may have different amounts of gold, but we all have at least one, whoever we are, we all have at least one bag of all 3 types of gold: time, finances and material possessions, and abilities. And we have the ability to make investment choices about those 3 golds. And many of us actually have multiple bags of each of these golds. The question this parable poses for those who would be servants of God is, what are we going to do with the bags of gold that we have, with our time, our finances, material possessions and abilities? Now, in my experience, the most significant issue that determines what we do with our bags of gold relates with our view of where our gold comes from, the source of our gold, if you like, for investment. For example, if you view your gold as coming by your own hand, you know, through your own skills, effort, hard work, maybe even your personal good fortune, then you will see those bags of gold as yours, to do with whatever you choose to do with them. And you'll be absolutely right. It is yours to do with whatever you want, since it has come to you by your own hand. And no one will be able to argue with you on that. If, however, you view your bags of gold as ultimately coming from God, as a gift, even if you have worked hard in the process, then you will view your time, your finances and material possessions and your abilities as expressions of God's generosity into your life. You will have, if you like, a by God's hand perspective rather than a by your own hand perspective. And that will give you a completely different attitude towards how you invest and use your golds. You know, the car I'm driving at the moment is a very nice BMW. I was given it as a gift a couple of years ago. And when I asked the person who gave me the car, well, look, why didn't you just sell the car and use the money to offset the cost of the new car you were getting? They simply turned around to me and said, well, you know, everything I have belongs to God. I asked God what I should do with this car, and he told me to give it away. And I was really challenged by that response. I mean, I asked myself the question, do I ask God about what I do with everything that I have? It was personally very challenging, but also very beneficial for me that they did ask God that question. Anyway, of course, the parable makes clear that God has not only generously given to us for our blessing, he's also given to us as an investor. He's entrusted the resources of time, finances, material possessions and abilities to us with a view to receiving a return, a kingdom return. Those that have a godly view of their bags of gold want to respond generously and also want to be diligent with the trust that's been given to them. And my first point on this parable is recognizing our source of investment. And I put it as the first point because being faithful servants starts with recognizing that everything we have is a generous trust given us by God. Recognizing in the bags of gold that we have both the generosity and trust of the Master is what sets the scene and framework for us to be faithful servants with our yellow, white and rose gold. Faithfully and generously investing into the kingdom our time, our finances, material possessions and our abilities, because we know the generosity that has brought that into our lives. Here's a question under my first point. Are you an owner of your golds with a by my hand perspective, or are you a steward of his golds with a by God's hand perspective? The second point I want to talk about is recognizing investment benefits. So the choice we face with our bags of gold is essentially twofold: to invest or to bury, which really equates with a choice to invest it for God or to keep it to ourselves. So very quickly, here are 3 drawbacks of burying your gold, keeping it to yourself, alongside 3 benefits of investing it into God's work and kingdom. So firstly, a drawback and a benefit from the parable. If you keep your gold for yourself, you can use it to create your own happiness. But if you invest it into serving God, you get to share in God's happiness. We see that in verse 21 and 23, where the 2 servants who invested for God were told by God, come and share in your master's happiness. You know, my father didn't live as a Christian. He died about 9 months ago. 2 days before he died, he became a Christian, which is fantastic. I'm looking forward to being reunited with him. But because he didn't live as a Christian, he could never understand why I gave what he considered were significant amounts of time, money, and my gifts and abilities into serving church and serving God. Actually, he used to lecture me on how wrong I was not to invest all of those things into myself and into my family. It was like he saw what was going out, but he never really understood what was coming back in. He never fully appreciated that there was a fullness of life, a fulfillment, a contentment, a pleasure and a joy flowing back into my life and my family, far beyond what I could ever have generated by simply using my resources for myself and for my family. You know, my dad spent his life using his gold simply to generate happiness for himself and the family he loved. And myself and Linda and our kids were all on the receiving end of his generosity. So I'm grateful for that. But his son, that is me, by God's grace, had the opportunity to invest his golds in such a way as to open a door to sharing in God's happiness. You know, my dad's well, if you like, of happiness was at its best half full during his life. His son's well, through the kindness of God, has been full and more often than not overflowing with life and fulfillment and joy. Here's the question. Do we want to keep our golds for ourselves to create our own happiness, or invest them into serving God and sharing in his happiness? The second drawback versus benefit that comes from the parable is keep your gold for yourself and you will ultimately lose it. It will be taken from you. If you invest it into serving God, you will be rewarded with more. You'll have an abundance. Verse 21 and 23 are verses in which the first 2 servants are told by the master, by God, you've been faithful with few things, I'll put you in charge of many things. But to the third servant in verse 28, the master says, so take the bag of gold from him and give it to the one who has 10 bags. For whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have, will be taken from them. In the late 1990s, I was leading a church in Manchester, and I was discipling 4 young men who I saw as having significant potential in terms of the kingdom, in terms of leadership. And they were all men that were hungry to invest their gold into God and into his kingdom. You may recognize some of them. One of them was a young man called Ben Cooley, another was called Matt Walls, a third was called Chris Vale, and the fourth will remain nameless. But 3 of those guys totally fulfilled their potential because they kept investing themselves and their golds into serving God and his kingdom. Ben Cooley now leads an amazing Christian charity called Hope for Justice, which is doing an amazing work helping to free people from modern day slavery. Matt Walls leads a great work in Wales for the Message Trust. And Chris Vale, many of you know, served here at TVCC for many years and is currently doing a great job serving God in a church called Gateway in Winnipeg in Canada. And as I look at all of those guys, there is about all of them a sense of God's richness of life and abundance that they and their families are enjoying. But the 4th guy that I was involved in discipling decided to stop investing his golds into God and his kingdom and to invest them instead into himself and his own kingdom. And in the world's eyes, you might look at him today and say, well, he looks very successful, he's got lots of big houses and cars, but I want to tell you, virtually everything else, including his family, has fallen away and been lost. I would describe him as living in poverty at this time, not in the abundance he could have known. And the pivotal point was when he decided to stop investing his golds into God and start keeping them for himself. Bury your golds, keep them for yourself, and you'll ultimately lose them. They'll be taken from you. Invest in serving God and be rewarded with abundance. And the final drawback and benefit is if you keep your gold to yourself, you'll ultimately come under judgment. If you invested into serving God, you'll ultimately receive a warm welcome. Ultimately, the issue of how we use our time, finances, material possessions and abilities actually has eternal implications. You can't read the parable and come to any other conclusion. When I was reflecting on this, I asked myself the question, is this parable suggesting somehow you get to heaven by works? That you work your way to heaven by giving your time, or buy your way to heaven by giving and investing your money? What about the gospel that says it's about love for God and you get to heaven by faith? Well, as I reflected on this question, I felt the Holy Spirit say this to me. I felt him say, genuine love and faith that understands how generous God has been to us will always want to generously give back to God. Give back its time, its finances, its material possessions, and its gifts and abilities. The servant with 1 bag of gold didn't get judged and thrown out because God was 1 bag of gold short. He was judged and thrown out because he lacked love for God and faith in God, and that was reflected by how he handled what had been generously entrusted to him. And that is a very sobering thought. And it should make each of us soberly assess how generously we're investing our golds, because ultimately it will be an issue of judgment. But praise God, it can also be an issue of welcome. In all my service of the Lord, there is one phrase I often replay again and again in my head in the hope that one day I'll hear it. And it's a phrase from this parable. Well done, good and faithful servant. Well done, Martin. Welcome, enter, come be with me. Come share and enjoy what I prepared for you. I want to hear that phrase when I pass from this life. So in the meantime, I need to ensure I steward the trust that he's given me, the golds that he's given me, wisely, faithfully, and generously. And finally, I just want to talk briefly about recognizing investment opportunities. Opportunities to invest in and serve God with our golds are numerous. They're around us all the time. A couple of examples of this. This week, I was looking for an odd job man to do some jobs on my mother's house. I put it on the eldership WhatsApp. Did anyone know someone they could recommend? And Mike Beaumont said, well, I haven't got someone I can recommend, but I've got time and I've got some DIY skills. Why don't I come round and start doing the list of jobs that your mum needs doing on the house? What a fantastic blessing that was to me. What a fantastic blessing to my mother as Mike set his heart to use some of his gold, in a sense, to serve others, and in so doing to serve God. Fantastic to honour Johnny and Leanne this morning. How diligent and how faithful and how faithfully they've used their golds over the years to serve our children in Tees Valley Community Church. And not only them, a whole team of people around them. We recently got a new neighbour in, and I was busy doing something, couldn't really afford the time, but I saw them pulling a drive some way down the road, and I thought, I need to stop, I need to make time. So I invested a little bit of my time, went over, had a conversation with them, welcomed them, introduced myself to them, and discovered they're having a baby in 3 weeks' time. Came back to Lena and said, right, we need to buy a card, maybe a little present, and somehow invest something of our gold, something of our time back into them, to give them something, of God, as they move onto our street. There are many technical volunteers that give their time and their skills into putting these Sunday services together. This morning, Joe Biddlecombe has been putting it all together. So thank you, Joe, for using your gold and investing it in the serving God this week. I want to as well commend people's faithfulness in Tees Valley Community Church for faithfully tithing and giving financially, because remarkably, we have had absolutely no downturn in our financial income whatsoever. Why? Because you have been faithfully giving your gold, stewarding your resources, and serving God by faithfully tithing and giving. I want to say a huge thank you to you for your faithfulness. And I want to encourage those of you that maybe aren't tithing and giving to think of doing so, because it's right by God, because the more we have come in, the more we can achieve and do for God. There are countless opportunities all around us to invest time, finances, our material possessions and skills into God and into his kingdom. Now this morning, if you recognise the gold you have been given as a generous trust and gift from God, if you desire to be a faithful servant who shares in their Father's happiness, enjoys their Father's abundance, and knows their Father's pleasure and welcome, then I would encourage you this morning to start praying. Pray that God will start to show you kingdom investment opportunities, small and large ones. And you will not be disappointed if you pray, because God will open your eyes to those investment opportunities. And if you obediently take those opportunities and invest some of your gold into them, you will be amazed at what God does in you and through you. And as ever this morning, I want to finish by saying, if you don't know this generous Father that we've been talking about, we want to tell you he has a very, very big and generous heart towards you personally, and you can know him and you can connect with him this very morning. If after this service you go to our website, hope.tvcchurch.org.uk/find hope, you'll find a 7-minute video there that takes you through 4 simple steps that will enable you to connect with your loving, generous Heavenly Father and enter into an amazing relationship. And there's also the ability on that page to connect with us personally as a church and let us get in touch with you. So it's been fantastic being with you this morning. Thank you so much for listening. I do trust God's spoken to you and you've received wisdom for life and how you might use your gold faithfully as you move into tomorrow. And I'm going to pass back now to Bijou and Mary, who are going to take some time to pray with us. God bless you. Have a great week.